Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we are lineup building for week 12 of the NFL season over on Draftkings, more so focusing on cash game roster construction. Now a couple of things before I start this video. Number one, the purpose of this is not for me to build you guys a lineup to use in all of your contests. You have to be able to think for yourselves and build your own lineups. I'm not even sure what this is going to look like yet. We are building this together. I'm just trying to target players that meet a certain criteria for me that I use in cash games. Guys that are going to be decently high owned, have somewhat safe floors. I like their prices, I like their matchups, and things like that. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And YouTube tells me that around 50% of the people watching these videos have not yet subscribed. So if you're a frequent visitor of the channel, or if you're new and you like what you see, consider that subscribe button because it really helps the channel grow, and that's obviously going to help me out as well. And I'm really hoping we get to 7,000 subscribers soon because that would be absolutely awesome. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so if you guys have been watching my videos for quite some time, you know I typically like to start with running backs in my cash game build because those are like the key pieces to our lineup. Those are the guys that are going to touch the ball the most, and I want to absolutely make sure that those are the guys that I want in my lineup. Wide receivers, tight ends, defenses, they're kind of interchangeable for the most part. I don't mind swapping a few guys around at the end of the video to make it work, but for running backs, I'm kind of solidified in the guys I want to choose, so we're going to pretty much start with that. But in this video, I want to go two different ways. I want to try a spend up quarterback approach, and I want to try spending down for a quarterback and see what that lineup could look like as well. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go with the spend up quarterback approach. So instead of plugging in the running backs first, I'm going to pick what quarterback I want, and it's pretty easy for me. I think it's between Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, but since we can save $400 with Josh Allen, which I think he has similar upside, I'm going to take him here, and this is a good game environment versus the Chargers, and he's been pretty good all season long. I know he had a stretch kind of in the middle of the season where he was kind of giving you some disappointing games, but for the most part, Josh Allen's been one of the best quarterbacks for fantasy purposes, and he runs the ball quite a bit as well. So you get that rushing upside and rushing touchdown upside that he offers you every single week, and this is one of the best game environments of the entire week. Chargers Buffalo, I believe this game's got a 53-point over/under, a decently tight spread as well. I expect this game to be back and forth for the most part, and a big boost for Josh Allen, the Buffalo Bills. I know they're going to be without John Brown, but Casey Hayward's going to be out for the Chargers and a couple of other key pieces on their defense as well. So I would not be surprised if Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs have another huge game here. So I'm going to plug him in as my QB1 for the spend up build. Then we'll see where we go with the cheap quarterback build. Probably might end up being Derek Carr. I know he's pretty cheap versus the Atlanta Falcons. So anyway, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but we'll see when we get there. But since we have our quarterback plugged in, he's a bit expensive, so we're probably going to definitely have to find some value somewhere else in this video. But we're going to move on to the running back position, and I feel like it's pretty obvious, and it's going to be really hard to fade him, especially in cash games. But it's Dalvin Cook at $9,500. I know, massive price tag, but the guy's just been so good this year. He's kind of the 2019 version of Christian McCaffrey and Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson of past years. But the guy's getting close to 30 touches per game. If you look at since week 8, 30 carries, 22 carries, 30 and 27. Also a handful of targets in pretty much all those games as well. And his worst game of the entire year is 15.2 points. That is a really safe floor. And he's had games of over 50 Draftkings points versus Green Bay, then over 40 versus Detroit. Not saying he's going to get 40, 50 points, but this is a great matchup versus Carolina, bottom 5 run defense. They're top 5 in points allowed per game to the running back position, nearly bottom 5 DB versus the run. So Dalvin Cook, he should have a monster game, and I think we should expect close to 30 touches, if not more. He should also get a handful of targets as well. And Adam Thielen's out, which I know he's a wide receiver, so it doesn't directly affect Dalvin Cook, but the offense is going to completely run through Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson here, so I feel pretty good about Dalvin Cook, even though he is super expensive. I'm going to find enough salary relief options to make it work this week. So now that we have Josh Allen and Dalvin Cook in our lineup, we only have $4,700 left, so we're definitely going to have to go dumpster diving at some point, but there's plenty of cheap options this week, like wide receiver, tight end, defense. There's definitely a lot of cheap ways we can go, so I'm not really too concerned about it. So let's now get into our RB2 spot. Now, I think there's a couple of options here. We could either go mid-range with a guy like James Robinson, or we could go all the way down to Brian Hill and make our flex spot a little bit weird. But personally, I'm going to go with James Robinson and RB2 just because there's a lot of guys out for the Jaguars, Chris Conley, DJ Chark. So the offense is going to run through pretty much James Robinson, which it usually does. Then Keelan Cole and LaVisca Chenault are going to be involved as well. But Robinson, we should expect 20-plus touches for him. And he's not really had a bad game all season long. He has not scored less than double-digit points. And the volume's going to be there. The guys actually look pretty good. I'm not sure how the offense is going to be with Mike Glennon. We have yet to see that. But the Browns defense certainly doesn't scare me, and they're down their two best players, in Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward, which is a big boost for the passing game. But James Robinson, I think he's just a little bit too cheap here. I think he should be closer to $7,000. Now, the Browns have been better versus the run than they have versus the pass this season, but this is mainly just a volume play on a team that definitely is missing some pieces. So James Robinson, we're going to plug him in, and I feel pretty good about that. And he's involved in the passing game as well, so I am viewing it as a very safe play this week. Now, after that, we can go a couple of different ways because we got our two stud running backs in and we got our spend up quarterback. So we can either move on to the wide receiver position, or we can plug in a third running back in the flex spot, and a guy would be like Brian Hill. He's only $4,000. Todd Gurley's out, so he's going to be the starting running back. Should see 15 plus touches in that game, and he's involved in the passing game as well. And it's a great matchup versus the Raiders, a bottom 5 run defense. But I don't feel like he's an absolute must play. I remember the last time Brian Hill was chalk last year, it did not work out at all. Not saying just because he didn't work out last year doesn't mean that's going to be the case again. I'm just saying I don't think he's an absolute must play. If we can afford him at the end of this video or lineup, I would love to be able to do that. It's just as of right now, that's kind of TBT. So let's just start with the wide receiver position. And trust me, guys, I would love to be able to afford Stephon Diggs. I think he's one of the top plays on the slate, especially with Casey Hayward being out. And he would obviously be a good correlation play with Josh Allen. It's just I don't think we're going to be able to make it work. He's been super consistent this season, though, one of the best wide receivers in football. He's yet to have a game below double-digit points. It's just if we plug him in, we're talking about 3,800 left per player, and we still have like 5 positions to go. So I know there's plenty of value, and it could work. It's just I don't feel that great about it. So I'm gonna steer away from Stephon Diggs here. If you can afford him, sure, I love Diggs this week, one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. It's just going to be pretty tough to fit him in this lineup. So we're going to spend down a little bit for a wide receiver 1. And we already have Dalvin Cook and James Robinson and Josh Allen, so it's not like we have to get too many more studs in our lineup. We've already got quite a few studs. But Justin Jefferson at $6,300, I kind of hinted him early on when I was talking about Dalvin Cook. But with Adam Thielen out, a guy that has around a 30% target share, the entire offense is going to run through Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson. And Justin Jefferson, he's been one of the highest graded wide receivers over on PFF this season. He's averaging close to 0.6 fantasy points per route ran, which is actually higher than Keenan Allen, Diggs, all those guys this year. The guy's been phenomenal. Now, I know this is a run-first football team, but the matchup versus Carolina and no Adam Thielen in the equation, I mean, it's a guy with around a 30% target share. So once you redistribute all those targets, it's probably going to be you're probably going to see more targets to Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, I guess Cal Rudolph as well with Irv Smith being out. But Jefferson is in line for probably close to, if not more than double-digit targets in this game. And the guy's been an elite talent this season. He's definitely been absolutely amazing. In my opinion, the best rookie wide receiver. I know CeeDee Lamb's up there as well, but Jefferson's been absolutely awesome. And the Carolina Panthers, they actually have been a bit stingy versus wide receivers this season, but they're bottom half in the league DVOA-wise versus the pass. And again, this is just mainly because Adam Thielen's out. So I know we have 2 Vikings, but they have a team 12 nearly 28 this week, and points should be scored. And this is where the offense is going to be ran through. So I'm just going to take those pieces, and I feel pretty darn good about it. And now that we have Jefferson in, we only have $4,000 left per player, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but when you factor in a defense and probably a cheap wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 2 and even a cheap flex, it shouldn't be that hard to fit him in. So we could either go flex, tight end, or defense, or just keep working on wide receivers. Personally, I think we're just going to keep working on wide receivers just because I kind of want to go down the line here. And since we couldn't afford Stephon Diggs, I'd like to at least get one pass catching option with Josh Allen just to make it a little bit correlated. So since we can't get Diggs and John Brown's out, we can go the Gabriel Davis route, who's the min price at $3,000. And the last time John Brown was out, or the last couple of times he was out, Gabriel Davis played on 100% and 95% of the snaps. So the guy's going to be on the field, and he's the min price. So you can't really ask for much more, and he pairs well with our quarterback. So I feel pretty good about just plugging him in at $3,000, and that should open up our lineup just a little bit, which we definitely need some salary relief. So I don't feel too bad about that. Then we're probably going to have to find another cheap wide receiver. And as you guys are going to see this week, it's probably a good week to spend down at the wide receiver position because there's just so much value. There's guys that are out, and there's just guys that are way too cheap, including Gabriel Davis. And the next guy, which I'm going to try to plug in Keelan Cole because Chris Conley and DJ Chark are going to be out for the Jaguars. So the entire offense is going to be Keelan Cole, Laviska Shenault, and James Robinson for the most part. There's a couple of other guys that are going to get work as well, but it should be a decently concentrated offense. And it's a pretty good matchup versus the Cleveland Browns. They've been awful versus wide receivers this season. And even better, Denzel Ward's going to be out for this game. And the Jags, I believe, are 7-point dogs on the road. So they should be throwing the ball quite a bit. And the Browns are already one of the worst teams in the league versus wide receivers. And like I said, Denzel Ward is out. And he's really the only guy worth caring about in that secondary. So when you take him out of the equation, they should be able to have some pretty good games, and they're both way too cheap. Keelan Cole is 3,600 and Laviska Shenault is 3,300. If you had to pick one, I prefer Keelan Cole, but if you need $300 left at the end of your lineup, I don't mind going with Laviska Shenault just to save a few bucks. I should have similar upside in this game. But for this lineup, we're going to plug in Keelan Cole here just because he's in 3,600, and I like him just a little bit more than Laviska Shenault. And if we need $300 more at the end of our lineup to make it work, I don't mind going down to Shenault. But fantastic matchup versus Cleveland. I guess I'm not really sure how Mike Glennon's going to use his wide receivers, but he really doesn't have many choices to go besides Keelan Cole and Shenault here. So we're going to plug one of those guys in. And I'm not hating the way this lineup looks. I know we have two super cheap wide receivers, but they're going to be in expanded roles because there's guys with injuries, and they're in some pretty decent matchups as well. So now we have over $4,500 left, and we have a tight end, a flex spot, and a defense to work with. Just so we know what we have to work with at tight end and flex, because I don't want to get stuck with like the worst defense on the entire slate. So I'm going to plug in a mid-range defense here, and I think I'm just going to go with the Giants because they're facing Brandon Allen and the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals weren't even that good with Joe Burrow at quarterback. Obviously, the guy is fine. He's obviously super talented, but now you have Brandon Allen at quarterback. Not really too worried about them putting up a ton of points. I know the Giants are on the road, and they're not that great of a defense, but Brandon Allen does not scare me. So we're going to plug him in at our defense spot. And now we have $5,200 left per player, which is not that bad. So we could actually spend up for a tight end. And I know I said early on in my video on Friday, if you watched that I'm not one to really spend up at the tight end position because it doesn't really fit optimal lineups. But the way this build works, we might be able to spend up for a tight end. So we could either go Travis Kelce or Darren Waller. And let's actually try that. Instead of going cheap at tight end like with an Austin Hooper or even a Kyle Rudolph, let's try to fit in a Travis Kelce or Darren Waller. Let's just plug in the most expensive one, Travis Kelce here. I don't really think I have to explain why Travis Kelce is a good play every week just because the guy is super consistent. I mean, look, 10 targets, 12. No other tight end's really doing this besides Darren Waller, but even then, Darren Waller isn't as good as Travis Kelce, and it certainly doesn't have Patrick Mahomes throwing the football. And I definitely want pieces of this game, especially in tournaments, because we have a 56 point over in the game. So I would like to get exposure to it, and if I can, Travis Kelce at $7,000. I know he's a bit expensive, but it actually kind of works. Because there is a guy at $3,500 that I do think is actually a decent play this week. Now, since we only have $3,500 left, we can't fit in Brian Hill. But if we do drop from Travis Kelce to Darren Waller, we could fit in Brian Hill. So we'll go a couple of ways here. But let's just plug in the $3,500 guy because I know off the top of my head what his price point is. And it's going to be Denzel Mims, $3,500. I know it's not the greatest matchup versus Miami. They do have some pretty stingy corners. But the guy is getting targets every single week. The past 2 weeks, 8 and 7 targets. I know he's not going to do anything crazy, but if he can get us close to 10 points, he should get a handful of targets. That's not that bad at only $3,500. And ownership projections actually have him being pretty high owned this week. So I guess you're getting at least a high owned cheap play, which doesn't feel that bad in cash games and tournaments if you want to get off of that. I understand that, but that's actually not that bad of a build. You got Josh Allen, Dalvin Cook, James Robinson, Jefferson. Then you got kind of your bums in Gabriel Davis and Keelan Cole, but they're in some pretty good spots, especially with guys being injured. Then you have a stud tight end in Travis Kelce, Denzel Mims, and the Giants defense. Now, if you wanted to go the Brian Hill route just because he feels a little bit safer than Denzel Mims, I can't argue that. You could go down to Darren Waller at $6,000. And if you can't get the Travis Kelce, obviously Darren Waller's in a fantastic spot versus Atlanta. They're actually allowing the most points per game to the tight end position. And he gets similar target numbers to Travis Kelce. It's just, unfortunately, he doesn't have Patrick Mahomes throwing the football, but this is definitely a good game to target for fantasy. We have a 54 point over-under, a decently tight spread, and both those defenses are not that impressive at all. So Darren Waller, I like his chances of finding the end zone. He should have close to 100 yards in this game, and I would not be surprised if he sees around 10 targets. So we're going to plug him in, and then if we do that, we can get another piece to this game on the opposite side of the ball, and that would be Brian Hill. Oops. Okay, Brian Hill at $4,000. Now, we could look at his per-game numbers, but you got to keep in mind that's with Todd Gurley playing, so you have to throw that out the window. But even then, he was still involved in the offense, and he should see a handful of targets in this one, and I would not be surprised if he sees 10-plus points. If he gets into the end zone, you're probably going to definitely want him in cash games, so I don't feel too bad about that. And I know we have $500 left per player, but that feels a little bit safer than the Travis Kelce, Denzel Mims route, to be honest, just because Hill is definitely going to be in line for more volume than Denzel Mims, hopefully. So Allen, Cook, Robinson, Jefferson, Gabriel Davis, Keelan Cole, Darren Waller, Brian Hill, Giants defense. If you wanted to upgrade the defense, you could do that. Rams defense versus the 49ers. I think that's in play as well. So if you just wanted to bottom out your lineup, I actually don't think that's a bad way to go. With that being said, I wanted to do a cheap quarterback build, so I guess I'm going to clear all these guys out, and we'll see how that looks. So like I said earlier, the favorite cheap quarterback I have this week is pretty much Derek Carr. He just gets a fantastic matchup versus Atlanta. They're allowing close to 30 DraftKings points per game to the position, over 300 yards per game, and just they're dead last versus quarterback. So Derek Carr, $5,700 in what should be a decently high-scoring game. I do think he's a fine option. Now, this is a team that wants to run the football, but it is easier to pass on the Falcons than it is to run. So I think at $5,700, he's going to have a hard time not paying off his price point. So we're going to plug him in, and since I have Derek Carr, I know I don't typically like to just go straight to the tight end position, but I want to just pair him up with Darren Waller because that would just make sense correlation-wise. So we had the Carr-Darren Waller combination here, and I already talked about Darren Waller, so I don't have to go over that again. And I pretty much talked about everyone I'm going to talk about already, so there shouldn't be a super long section here, but we're going to plug in Dalvin Cook, we're going to plug in James Robinson. And then after that, I guess it's going to be a bit interesting to see how this is going to work out because we definitely have some more leeway here because I think after we plugged in James Robinson last time and a guy like Darren Waller, I think we had just slightly below $4,000 left per player, so definitely have a little bit more wiggle room. I'm obviously going to still want to use Justin Jefferson. I'm probably not going to want to try to get all the way up to Stephon Diggs because I don't even have Josh Allen in my lineup, so I feel like building around Diggs without Josh Allen in my lineup is probably not maybe the best way to go. So I'm going to pass on Stephon Diggs there. And we still have around $4,000 left per player, which, again, is not too bad. We can go with a couple of cheap wide receivers. I still want to try to get a cheap Jag, so we can either go with Laviska Shenault and Keelan Cole. Since we already used Keelan Cole, I guess we could try to get it a little bit different and use Laviska Shenault here, and I guess it'll open up our lineup just a little bit more. I mean, it's pretty much going to be him and Keelan Cole for the most part in the passing game. I know there's a couple of other guys that are going to be involved as well, but those are definitely the two main guys. So I feel pretty good about putting in one of them in pretty much most of my lineups for the most part, just because it's such a good spot versus Cleveland. And now we can work with either our wide receiver 3, our flex, and our defense. I'm going to just plug in Brian Hill because it feels a little bit safer, and I'm just getting more pieces of that game. I know correlation-wise, I guess Brian Hill paired with Darren Waller and Derek Carr isn't like it doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's just still getting more pieces to that game. And if you think the Raiders fall behind, I guess Brian Hill in the run game, then you can run it back with Derek Carr and Darren Waller. I guess that would make some sense, although I think it's kind of anyone's game there in Atlanta. But we're going to plug in Hill, and since he's 4,000, everyone's 4,000, it's going to be hard to find him, so I'm just going to search his name up and plug him in. So now we have $44.50 left per player, and if we plug in a cheapish defense, which I guess every defense is below $4,400, so we're going to definitely have close to $5,000 left for a wide receiver, which I don't hate that at all. Now, we could either go a little bit more expensive, we could go super cheap, or we could go more so mid-range. But let's just try plugging in the Giants again and see what we have to work with. I think it should be close to $6,000, so we'll see. So Giants at $3,200, that gives us $5,700 left per player, which I was kind of hoping it'd be a little bit more because I know there's a couple of guys close to $6,000 that I'd love to get in. Guys like Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, even Devontae Parker. That's $200 more, so that's kind of unfortunate. But maybe we could play around with their defense a little bit. But if you happen to go the Giants route, you do have Antonio Brown at $5,700. I don't think he's a great cash game play, but his target share has gone up the past 3 weeks that he's played. It was close to 30% in the last game, so I guess he'd actually be fine at $5,700. So you could plug him in. And although it doesn't feel that great for cash games, but you have a guy like Cole Beasley with John Brown out. He's going to be more involved in the passing game. And the last time that he played, he had a monster game. 30 DraftKings points versus Arizona, had 13 targets, over 100 yards, had that nice one-hand snag at the end of the game. You could go the Cole Beasley route. I wouldn't hate that. You could even upgrade your defense, although I think the next defense is $3,700, so I guess you'd kind of be stuck with the Giants defense. But there's a couple of other ways you can go for sure. If you want to fit in a guy like Robert Woods, you have to drop down your defense a little bit, so I guess if in Robert Woods, you only have to go down a little bit. You could use the Cardinals versus New England. They certainly have been a scary offense this season. I know the Cardinals defense isn't that great, but it'd give you $6,000, so you could fit in a guy like Robert Woods. You could go with Devontae Parker. Both guys are in some pretty good spots there, so plenty of ways you can go this week, but I think that's going to be it for this video, guys. So I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. I will have my core plays video up later today. If you want to follow me over on social media, I'm at Pennell16 on Twitter, cpen16 over on IG, and if you want to support the channel over on Patreon, it's much appreciated, but I would recommend waiting until the first of the month because it's just about the end of the month, and Patreon does charge you on the first, so I would hold off on that. Maybe that's something you can look forward to in week 13, but I think it's going to be it. I'm going to get out of here. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend.